The Cleveland Browns got embarrassed on Saturday. Yet despite the unfortunate ending to the season, I think all things considered, you have to be pretty proud with what the Browns were able to do throughout the regular season. Did they reach their final goal? No. But ultimately, with all their injuries they went through, the Deshaun Watson injury, the Nick Chubb injury, the several offensive tackle injuries, and so many other offensive and defensive injuries, you have to be proud with how the team performs, and I think moving forward, there's a lot to be concerned and a lot to be hopeful about for this Cleveland Browns roster. Let's get this out of the way. The game to Houston was not a very good representation of what this team has been throughout the entire season. It was an uncharacteristically bad game from both the offense and the defense, but maybe more specifically, the defensive line and their inability to get any pressure on CJ Stroud. Myles Garrett specifically did not have his best game. Now understand that CJ Stroud was getting the ball out pretty fast, so it was very difficult for him to actually get pressure. But even on most instances where he was holding onto the ball a little bit longer, it wasn't like Myles Garrett was doing a whole lot. And when you compare Myles Garrett and the defensive line's inability to get pressure with Martin Emerson and Greg Newsome's inability to make any plays on the ball, they got pretty much dismantled by the CJ Stroud-led Houston Texans offense. Whereas when you look at the offensive side of things, it really wasn't all that bad throughout most of the first half. They scored 2 touchdowns, and it looked like Joe Flacco, David Njoku, and the run game was actually starting to get going. The wheels, however, really started to fall off towards the back end of the second quarter and the beginning of the second half. Those 2 back-to-back pick sixes basically locked the game up for Houston. And those are 2 unfortunate plays for Cleveland, but also 2 very good plays for a very good Houston Texans team. Both the plays were Joe Flacco's fault, but they were also, again, like I said, great plays by what Houston was able to do. And even though this Browns offense has been able to sustain drives over and over again throughout the rest of the regular season, they really weren't able to do that in the second half of this game. Once the turnover started happening, it just felt like this offense completely fell apart because there was a lack of trust between the head coach and Joe Flacco, and it just felt like Joe Flacco was just in his own head, which of course makes sense. If I threw back-to-back pick sixes, I'd probably want to go into the locker room and cry. So 45-14 is a pretty bad look for your team, but as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there's some things that I think this team has to address this upcoming offseason, because as it sits, all you can really do right now is reflect on your most recent season and of course look forward to the future. For starters, Deshaun Watson will be back and he will be the starter next year. In the very small sample size we had with him this year, he had 1,115 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions, and even though he wasn't spectacular, there was definitely signs that he was stepping into the right direction. Is Deshaun Watson the franchise quarterback they thought he would be? Probably not, but at the end of the day, they have to make it work because you don't have a ton of other options. Because you paid the guy, and you're not going to have 40-plus-year-old Joe Flacco as your starter, and as it sits right now, Dorian Thompson-Robinson is basically your glorified backup who has some potential to be very good. So your best option is Deshaun Watson, and I don't think it's a bad option. I think if he can develop another year into the system and just play relaxed and cool football, I think he can take the next step to become a Pro Bowl level quarterback. And ultimately, that's what's going to be the headlines and the storyline going forward for this Cleveland Browns team. Can Deshaun Watson return back to that Pro Bowl All-Pro level? If the answer is yes, then this team has a legit chance to win the AFC. If the answer is no, I'm sorry Browns fans, it's going to get bad. Because Kevin Stefanski can only do so much. Yes, he's one of the best coaches in the NFL, but ultimately, it's up to the quarterback to help you win games. Stefanski can't actually control what happens on the field. He can only give you the play and just hope it goes well. And when you're paying a quarterback as much as they're paying Deshaun Watson, you would expect him to play up to that standard. And that standard is that Kevin Stefanski doesn't have to carry this team. Deshaun Watson can do that. So that's your quarterback problem. Again, if the quarterback situation does not improve next year, it's going to be another playoff, maybe first or second round exit. But if Deshaun Watson can play better, I'm not saying turn back to 2019, 2020 Deshaun Watson with Houston, but if he can play better than he has been these past 2 seasons, then I think they're in a good spot. Now, moving past the quarterback position, they have some really big question marks regarding their unrestricted and restricted free agents. They're going to have several key contributors enter the open market, guys like Sione Takitaki, Anthony Walker Jr., Harrison Bryant, Zadarius Smith, Kareem Hunt, Ronnie McLeod, Jerron Christian, Joe Flacco, and Daron Harmon. Of those guys, I think ideally you would like to bring back Sione Takitaki, maybe Anthony Walker, and maybe Zadarius Smith and Rodney McLeod. Now this team is pretty held up with their cap space situation. Obviously they are giving a ton of money to Deshaun Watson, and other guys like Myles Garrett, Amari Cooper, some of your other offensive linemen are taking up so much cap space that you are very limited with the money you do have. have. As it sits, they're currently over the cap space, I want to say like $13 million. Now they can get off some contracts and do some restructuring to make up a little bit more cap space to re-sign some guys and to go out in free agency and maybe potentially make some trades or some signings. It's pretty easy to manipulate the cap space, you just have to do it smartly. And I think Cleveland has a pretty good idea of how to do that. The number one cap casualty that I think will be gone, and this kind of pains me to say, but I think releasing Nick Chubb might be the move to go down. I mean, the guy's 28 years old, just suffered one of the most horrific leg injuries I've ever seen, and I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe he also suffered one at Georgia when he was in college. And as it is, even if he didn't have the injuries, a 28-year-old running back is only going to get worse and worse. Now add on a broken leg and several other injuries he's suffered throughout his career, and now we're talking about some serious issues with whether or not he's your future guy. Running backs are replaceable, maybe not the heartbeat of the team, but at the end of the day, the position is replaceable. I almost feel like it's a have to if you want to retain some of these stars you have on your roster. So this is going to be a team that's looking for less stars and more of the lines looking for guys who are more budget free agents, guys like Denzel Perriman, Jerick McKinnon like guys. As much as a T. Higgins or a Calvin Ridley would be amazing to add to this roster, it's just very unlikely they'll be able to have the money to go out and get those guys. And with all the injuries this team has, and some of these guys are getting some serious money, you really have to question which ones you're going to bring back. For example, do you bring back Jedrick Wills and Jack Conklin after another year of being on the IR? I mean, I know the tackle play was pretty bad, but Jaron Christian and DeJuan Jones looked pretty good, especially when DeJuan Jones was healthy. So I think you might want to just stick with those guys and move on from Jedrick Wills and Jack Conklin to save yourself up a little bit of cap space so that you can go out there and address some other holes. Would a healthy Jedrick Wills and Jack Conklin be better than what I'm telling you guys? 1000%. But if you want to save a little bit of cap and go out there and get a little bit more quality players in certain higher positions of need, then you would go out there and do that. You also have guys on defense like Grant Delpit, Rodney McLeod, Maurice Hurst, and Anthony Walker, who also went on IR at some point, who you might also be looking at moving on from. I do think Grant Delpit is a must bring back because he was having a pretty good year when healthy, but guys like Maurice Hurst and Anthony Walker, I know I mentioned him earlier, but still, I would suggest probably moving on from. They're good players, no doubt, but you don't have the cap space to be giving these injured players money to just sit on the bench or to sit in the injury room. At the end of the day, your time is now. This is the chance for you to go out there and win a championship. Not 5 years from now, not 3 years from now, right now. And if you're going to do that, moving off of some really good players who are going to be consistently injured might be the way to go down. Not to mention, they save you a ton of cap space, and as well as if you do decide to trade them, will probably give you some draft picks back. Like trading Jedrick Wills and Jack Conklin won't give you a first round pick, but it could give you an additional 5th or 4th round pick at best. I mean, the talent's already there on this roster. We saw this year that even with Joe Flacco, they could get carried all the way to a playoff berth. And sure, it did not end the way you wanted it to, but it was proven that even though you have injuries, you have the coaching staff and you have the stars who can carry you to that spot. Now, get rid of some of the injured guys from this most recent season, save a little bit of cap space, go out there and get some budget free agents who will actually fill in a specific role, and then draft effectively. They don't have their first round pick, which sucks, but you're going to have your second, your third, and the rest of your draft picks. Those picks will be critical. You look at a team like the LA Rams, which in a lot of ways are very similar to what we have here in Cleveland. Sure, talent for talent, it's a totally different story, but we're talking about a LA Rams team that almost consistently is a good team, like Cleveland, but never seems to have those first round picks because they constantly trade them, like Cleveland. So if Cleveland can somehow find their Kyren Williams, their Puka Nakuas, and so on and so forth, that will drastically change the way we look at this Browns team. So let's put a little bit of a ribbon on this present. To sum everything up, number one, Deshaun Watson is your quarterback. Please, Deshaun Watson, get better for the sake of the Browns. Next up, there has to be a long evaluation amongst this coaching staff regarding the injured players and whether or not they are better and more effective for the team than the role players who stepped up in their absence. Next up, with the little bit of cap space you're going to have to find budget role-playing free agents who fill in specific needs of what you have to get. And lastly, you have to take the LA Rams approach to drafting and draft effectively with your second, third, fourth, fifth round picks. If they do that, I think they're in a good spot to be a very competitive team next year. Now, as for will they do that, I don't have the answers to that, hopefully. But Browns fans, you let me know. And if you guys enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button. But I love you guys. Peace.